There's this weird thing happening right now where everyone online is suddenly obsessed with locking in, like it's some ancient monk technique that just got rediscovered on TikTok last week. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you've definitely felt it, because it's that pressure in your chest that says you're behind, you're late, you're wasting time, and everyone else somehow figured out the secret code except you. It's the feeling that if you just lock in hard enough, long enough, intensely enough, your life will finally start moving, and everything messy will clean itself up like a perfectly edited montage. Here's the wild part though. Gen Z isn't addicted to productivity. They're addicted to the idea of becoming someone else overnight. And that addiction looks a lot like locking in. Think about how aggressive the phrase even sounds. Lock in. Not ease in. Not figure it out. Not try again tomorrow. Lock in. Like you're sealing yourself in a mental room with nothing but your goals, your guilt, and a cold cup of coffee you forgot about 3 hours ago. It sounds powerful, almost heroic, like something you'd whisper to yourself before a final boss fight. And honestly, that's probably why it spread so fast. Because right now, life feels like a never-ending boss fight with no checkpoint. Everyone's tired, but nobody feels allowed to be tired. Everyone's overwhelmed, but the internet keeps telling you that overwhelm is just a mindset issue, that if you really wanted it, you'd be grinding at 5 a.m., journaling at 5:07, hitting the gym at 5:12, and somehow still glowing emotionally by noon. And if you're not doing that, the algorithm very politely slides you a video of someone who is, just in case you forgot to feel bad about yourself today. So locking in becomes the solution to everything. Feeling lost? Lock in. Broke? Lock in. Heartbroken? Lock in harder. It's become the emotional duct tape of our generation. Not because it actually fixes the problem, but because it gives you something to do instead of sitting with the discomfort of not knowing. And here's where it gets interesting, because this obsession didn't come out of nowhere. Gen Z grew up watching systems fail in real time. School promised stability and delivered anxiety. Hustle culture promised freedom and delivered burnout. Social media promised connection and delivered comparison. So when someone says, forget all that, just lock in and focus, it feels like relief. It feels clean. It feels simple. Almost too simple. But simplicity is seductive when your brain is tired. Locking in feels like control in a world that keeps slipping out of your hands. It feels like putting noise-canceling headphones on your life and telling everyone else to shut up for a second. And honestly, sometimes that's not a bad thing. Focus isn't the villain here. Discipline isn't evil. The problem starts when locking in becomes an identity instead of a tool. Because somewhere along the way, locking in stopped being about focus and started being about escape. Escape from uncertainty. Escape from feeling average. Escape from the fear that maybe there is no clear path and everyone's just guessing. And if that sentence made you uncomfortable, yeah, same. The internet loves to package locking in as this dramatic transformation arc. Day 1 you're messy, confused, sleeping too much. Day 30 you're ripped, rich, emotionally detached, and somehow drinking green juice without making a face. There's always background music. There's always a caption that says something like, "No one believed in me," even though the comments are literally full of people believing in them. But what you don't see is what happens when the camera turns off. What happens when you lock in and still don't feel fulfilled. What happens when you do everything right, and the emptiness just changes shape instead of disappearing. What happens when your entire self-worth quietly moves into your output, and suddenly rest feels like failure. And that's the part nobody likes to talk about, because it doesn't fit into a 30-second clip. There's this unspoken rule online that if you're not improving, you're falling behind. So Gen Z internalized that, swallowed it whole, and turned locking in into a coping mechanism. Not because they're lazy, not because they don't want to feel, but because sitting still with uncertainty feels worse than exhaustion. It's easier to say, I'm locking in, than to say, I don't know what I'm doing and that scares me. And look, before we go any deeper into this spiral, quick pause, because if you're still here right now, you're already locked in mentally, which means you might as well subscribe. Not even for me, honestly. I just need one more subscriber to prove to my mom that this is, in fact, a real conversation with real humans and not me talking to myself in a dark room with a microphone. If you hit the button, you're basically part of my emotional support system. Huge responsibility. No pressure. Okay, back to the existential stuff. What makes this even more intense is how public locking in has become. It's not enough to be focused. You have to perform your focus. Study with me streams, gym check-ins, daily routine videos, productivity apps sending you notifications like disappointed parents. Everyone's watching everyone else try to get their life together at the same time, which somehow makes it more stressful, not less. And quietly, without realizing it, a lot of people start confusing motion with direction. Just because you're busy doesn't mean you're going somewhere. Just because you're disciplined doesn't mean you're aligned. Just because you're locked in doesn't mean you're okay. But slowing down feels risky when you're scared of falling behind. So instead, you double down. You wake up earlier. You cut out more distractions. You tell yourself you'll rest later, after you become the version of yourself you think you're supposed to be. And later keeps moving. There's this strange emotional math that happens where suffering starts to feel productive. Like if it hurts, it must be working. Like if you're exhausted, you must be doing something right. And that mindset gets praised. People clap for burnout when it's wearing a nice outfit and posting motivational quotes. The scary part is how normal this has become. Feeling guilty for resting. Feeling anxious when you're not optimizing something. Feeling behind even when you're objectively doing fine. That's not ambition. That's survival mode with a productivity filter. And I know someone's thinking, okay, but what's the alternative? Just do nothing. No, that's the trap. The conversation always gets framed like it's either obsessive discipline or total chaos. Like there's no middle ground where focus exists without self-punishment. Locking in was supposed to be about clarity. Somewhere along the way, it turned into pressure. And here's something that doesn't get said enough. A lot of people aren't locking in because they love their goals. They're locking in because they're afraid of who they'll be if they don't reach them. That fear is quiet, but it's heavy. It sounds like, if I stop, everything will fall apart. It sounds like, if I rest, I'll lose momentum. It sounds like, if I slow down, I'll have to actually think about how I feel. So instead, you stay busy, productive, locked in, and from the outside, it looks impressive. From the inside, it can feel lonely. Because when your whole life becomes a project, you forget you're also a person. And yeah, there is a moment where locking in feels amazing. The early days, the motivation spike, the sense of control, the illusion that you finally cracked the code. That part is real. That's why it's addictive. But addictions aren't about how they start. They're about what they replace. If locking in replaces curiosity, that's a problem. If it replaces joy, that's a problem. If it replaces self-compassion, that's a really big problem. And here's where I'll leave you hanging for a second, because the real issue isn't locking in itself. It's what Gen Z is trying to protect themselves from when they do it. There's a deeper layer under all this discipline and self-improvement talk. And once you see it, the whole thing starts to look very different. Also, tiny side note before we get there next time, if you're enjoying this and you don't subscribe, I'll assume you think orange is both a fruit and a color, and that you're okay with that chaos. We'll have words. Do the right thing. In the next part, we're going to talk about what locking in is actually masking, why so many people feel empty even when they're winning, and how this obsession quietly shapes identity, relationships, and self-worth in ways nobody warns you about. So here's where things get uncomfortable, but also kind of relieving once you see it clearly. A lot of people think locking in is about ambition, but most of the time it's actually about avoidance. Not avoidance in a lazy way, more like emotional parkour. You're jumping over feelings so fast you never have to land on them, because landing would mean stopping. And stopping would mean hearing your own thoughts without background noise. That's the part nobody puts in the highlight reel. When Gen Z locks in, they're not just chasing success. They're running from a quiet fear that creeps in when the phone is face down, The to-do list is done for the day, and there's nothing left to optimize. That fear usually sounds like a question they don't know how to answer yet. Something like, is this really what I want? Or worse, what if I do all this and still feel empty? So instead of asking the question, they open another productivity app. And look, this didn't come out of nowhere. Gen Z grew up online. Identity was never just something you felt, it was something you displayed. Bios, highlights, captions, streaks. You weren't just becoming a person, you were curating one in real time while people watched, liked, ignored, or compared themselves to you. So of course self-improvement turned into performance. Of course locking in became content. Of course rest started to feel suspicious, like if you're not visible, you're not valid. That pressure quietly teaches you something dangerous. It teaches you that who you are is less important than what you produce. And once that belief sinks in, locking in stops being optional. It feels necessary, like armor. Because if you're always improving, no one can accuse you of standing still. If you're always busy, no one can call you irrelevant. If you're always grinding, you don't have to explain why you feel unsure about your direction, your relationships, or yourself. But here's the irony. The harder you lock in without checking why you're doing it, the further you drift from yourself. People start confusing discipline with self-worth. Missing a workout feels like a moral failure. A slow day feels like falling behind in life. Rest feels earned only after exhaustion, never before. And eventually, even the wins feel kind of hollow, because you don't know how to enjoy them without immediately raising the bar again. There's this quiet moment a lot of people hit that they don't talk about. It's when they finally reach a goal they've been locking in for, and instead of relief, they feel nothing. Or worse, anxiety. Because the thing that was driving them forward is gone, and now there's space. And space means feelings. So what do? They set a new goal. Lock in again. Rinse. Repeat. That's how self-improvement turns into a treadmill. And the scariest part is that the internet rewards this behavior. Burnout gets likes if it's aesthetic enough. Overworking gets praised if it comes with results. Emotional suppression gets labeled as being locked in. No one claps for balance. No one makes viral edits about listening to your limits. So Gen Z adapts. They get really good at looking okay. Really good at staying busy. Really good at turning their entire life into a project so they never have to ask who they are without the progress bar. And before we go deeper, quick real talk moment. If this is hitting a little too close and you're still watching, that tells me you're my people. Which means you should probably subscribe, because I was told I couldn't hit my goal. And honestly, I'd love to prove some imaginary haters wrong before we spiral further into the human condition. You'd be doing charity work. Deeply noble. Anyway, here's where philosophy sneaks in without asking for permission. Humans don't actually need constant growth to feel meaningful. They need coherence. They need their actions to make sense with their values. Locking in without reflection is like driving really fast without checking the map. You feel powerful, but you're not actually sure where you're going. And Gen Z is especially vulnerable to this because so many traditional paths feel unstable or broken. Careers don't promise security anymore. Relationships are complicated. The future feels blurry. So when the external world feels uncertain, people turn inward and try to control the only thing they can, themselves. That's not weakness. That's adaptation. But adaptation can turn into overcorrection. Instead of asking, what kind of life do I want? People ask, how can I optimize myself to survive whatever happens? And that question creates a very different mindset. One leads to intention. The other leads to constant tension. You see it in how people talk now. Everything is about discipline, sacrifice, and suffering. As if ease is suspicious. As if joy has to be justified. As if wanting a soft life means you're unserious or unmotivated. But here's a truth that feels obvious once you hear it, and somehow radical before that. You don't need to punish yourself to deserve a good life. Locking in doesn't have to mean disappearing emotionally. Focus doesn't require self-erasure. Discipline doesn't need cruelty to work. Yet so many people treat their inner world like something to conquer instead of understand. And it shows up in relationships too. When someone is locked in all the time, they're physically present but mentally elsewhere. Conversations feel rushed. Connection feels delayed until after I reach this goal. Vulnerability gets postponed. And slowly, life becomes something you're preparing for instead of living. People say, I'll relax once I get there, but there's always another there. And if you've ever had that feeling where you're doing everything right on paper, but still feel slightly disconnected from your own life, that's not because you're broken. It's because humans aren't designed to be machines with emotions as side effects. The wild part is that a lot of people don't even realize they're tired. They just feel numb, and numbness feels efficient. No distractions, no drama, no mess, just output. But numbness also blocks joy, curiosity, spontaneity, the stuff that makes effort feel worth it. And here's where the story shifts a little, because locking in isn't the villain of this story. It's a symptom, a signal. It's pointing to something unmet underneath. Most people don't want to be hyper-disciplined. They want to feel safe. They want to feel like their effort matters. They want to believe that if they work hard, their life will make sense. So they lock in. Hard. But what they actually need is alignment, not intensity. And alignment is quieter. It doesn't always look impressive. It doesn't always film well. It involves asking slower questions and sitting with answers that don't immediately turn into content. That's why it's avoided. Because sitting with yourself without distractions can feel terrifying when you've spent years proving your worth through productivity. And I know someone is thinking, okay, but if I stop locking in, won't everything fall apart? That fear makes sense. When discipline has been your lifeline, loosening your grip feels dangerous. But there's a difference between losing structure and building one that doesn't hurt you. This is where most people get it wrong. They think the solution is to quit trying, quit improving, quit caring. It's not. The shift is subtler. It's about changing why you lock in, not whether you do. Locking in to escape yourself will always lead to burnout. Locking in to express yourself feels completely different. And yeah, that sounds abstract right now. That's okay. It's supposed to. Because in the final part, we're going to talk about what healthy focus actually looks like, how to tell when discipline is helping versus harming, and how Gen Z can keep ambition without losing themselves in the process. Also, tiny transition moment here. If you don't subscribe before the final part, my hypothetical pet goldfish will be very disappointed in you, and I don't want that on either of our consciences. He's sensitive. Hit the button. The last part ties everything together, and it's the part most people don't realize they've been waiting for. Here's the part where everything slows down a little. Not because the story is ending, but because this is where it finally starts to make sense. Up until now, locking in has been framed like this extreme switch you flip. Either you're fully disciplined or you're falling apart. Either you're grinding or you're wasting your life. But real focus doesn't actually work like that. Real focus is quieter. It doesn't shout at you. It doesn't demand constant proof. It feels more like commitment than pressure. Healthy focus doesn't come from fear. It comes from clarity. When you know why you're doing something, you don't need to punish yourself into doing it. You don't need 10 motivational videos, 5 productivity apps, and a countdown timer screaming at you. You move differently. Slower sometimes. Softer. But more honestly. And that's the shift Gen Z hasn't really been shown yet. Most people were taught how to hustle, not how to listen. How to optimize, not how to align. So when something feels off, the instinct isn't to pause and reflect. It's to double down, to lock in harder. To assume the discomfort means you're not doing enough, instead of asking whether you're doing the right thing in the first place. There's a huge difference between discipline that supports you and discipline that silences you. Supportive discipline gives you structure so you can breathe. Harmful discipline turns structure into a cage. One feels grounding, the other feels heavy. And the tricky part is they can look identical from the outside. Same routines, same habits, same results sometimes. But internally, one is driven by curiosity and purpose, and the other is driven by fear of falling behind. One allows rest without guilt. The other treats rest like a betrayal. If you've ever felt anxious during a day off, like you're doing something wrong by not improving, that's not ambition talking. That's conditioning. You weren't born thinking rest was lazy. You learned it. And unlearning it doesn't mean becoming careless or unmotivated. It means redefining what progress actually looks like. Sometimes progress is doing less, but doing it with intention. Sometimes it's stopping long enough to ask yourself whether the version of success you're chasing is even yours. Because here's the thing no one tells you when they say lock in. You don't get extra points for suffering. Life doesn't reward you for being the most exhausted person in the room. And becoming someone you admire shouldn't require you to disappear along the way. A lot of people think they're trying to build a future, but they're actually postponing their present. Always preparing, always improving, always one milestone away from allowing themselves to feel okay. That's not a life. That's a waiting room. And the saddest part is how normal that's become. But it doesn't have to be dramatic to change. It doesn't require quitting everything and moving to a cabin in the woods. It starts with noticing. Noticing why you reach for productivity when you feel uncomfortable. Noticing when locking in feels like self-respect versus self-avoidance. Because locking in can be powerful when it's chosen, not compulsive. Chosen focus feels steady. Compulsive focus feels urgent. One asks, what matters right now? The other asks, how do I avoid falling behind? And that difference changes everything. Before we land this, quick honest moment. If you've made it this far and you haven't subscribed, I'm going to assume you're locked in emotionally but refusing to commit, which is very on brand for this entire video. But also, come on, help me out. I was told I couldn't do this. Prove them wrong. Or don't. But do. You know. Now here's the part one want you to sit with. You don't need to be locked in all the time to be worthy. You don't need to optimize every hour to deserve a meaningful life. And you don't need to turn yourself into a project to become someone you're proud of. You're allowed to be a person while you're becoming. The goal was never to erase uncertainty. The goal was to learn how to live with it without running away. Locking in became popular because uncertainty feels unbearable right now. The future feels shaky. The rules keep changing. Everyone's watching. Everyone's comparing. So people try to control what they can. But control isn't peace. Understanding is. And understanding takes patience. It takes letting go of the idea that you're behind. It takes realizing that no one actually knows what they're doing as much as they pretend to online. It takes accepting that growth isn't always loud, visible, or aesthetic. Sometimes growth looks like resting without guilt. Sometimes it looks like changing your mind. Sometimes it looks like choosing a slower path because it fits you better. And that doesn't mean you're giving up. It means you're paying attention. This is the part where locking in transforms from a coping mechanism into a choice. Where focus becomes something you use, not something that uses you. Where ambition exists without anxiety sitting in the driver's seat. You don't have to live your life like a constant self-improvement montage. You're allowed to have quiet days that don't lead anywhere impressive. You're allowed to enjoy things without turning them into steps toward something else. Because the point of becoming better was never to stop being human. So maybe the real question isn't, how do I lock in harder? Maybe it's, what am I afraid will happen if I don't? And if you sit with that question long enough, gently, without rushing to fix it, you might find that the answer changes how you approach everything. That's the shift. That's the relief. That's the unlock. If this resonated, take a second after this video ends and notice how you feel when you're not trying to improve anything. No judgment, just awareness. That alone is a kind of progress most people skip. Subscribe if you want to keep exploring these ideas, because the next video goes deeper into why rest feels uncomfortable, how social media rewired our sense of worth, and how to build a life that doesn't require you to constantly prove yourself to exist. And if you don't subscribe, that's okay too. Just know my goldfish will remember. Take care of yourself. Not as a project. As a person.